For months she moved like a shadow. No words, no noise, just quiet footsteps and a gentle touch. The maid never spoke, not even once. But that one afternoon, something happened. The millionaire's little boy, born without a voice, turned to her and looked into her eyes and whispered something in perfect Italian. The entire house froze. Her name was Angela, a full-figured woman with kind eyes, strong hands, and a silence that spoke louder than words. No one knew much about her, except that she never spoke. Not a whisper, not even a hum. She worked in silence, gliding through the marble halls of the luxury home like a spirit of peace. Dust vanished under her touch, dishes sparkled, but her eyes held oceans. The staff whispered behind her back, "Is she mute, broken, hiding something?" But Sophia didn't care. She had seen dozens of nannies come and go. None could reach her son. Daniel was 6, beautiful, brilliant, and silent. He had never spoken a single word in his life. Doctors said he had autism. Specialists were flown in, therapists tried everything. But nothing brought his voice to life. Sophia, wealthy, powerful, and used to getting results, was helpless in the one area that truly mattered, her son. Angela had left behind everything she knew in Africa. Once, she had been a linguist, a teacher. Her classroom echoed with children's voices, including the voice of her own little boy, until illness took him, and the silence that followed her across the ocean was permanent. She came to America not to work, but to escape, to forget. Maybe that's why she noticed the boy, not just his silence, but the sadness behind it, because sometimes only those who've lost a voice of their own can recognize the silence in others. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Daniel remained silent. He didn't cry, he didn't laugh, he didn't speak, not a single sound. It was like he had built a world of his own and locked the door from the inside. Therapist after therapist came and went. Toys, flashcards, rewards, nothing worked. Sophia tried everything, even flew in a top specialist from Italy. But Daniel just stared through them, as if they didn't exist. And so Sophia began to change. She became cold, tired, frustrated. She loved her son more than life itself, but that love began to feel powerless. Through it all, Angela never interfered. She simply watched, quietly, patiently, with the kind of stillness that felt ancient. Every day she cleaned Daniel's playroom, tidied his blocks, washed his favorite blanket, always in silence. Sometimes she would pause, look at him, then quietly return to work. She never tried to talk to him, never forced eye contact. She simply stayed. Then, one afternoon, something strange happened. Sophia was passing by the nursery when she heard it, a sound she hadn't heard in 6 years. A hum, soft, gentle, like the breeze on a summer night. She froze. She leaned closer, her heart racing. It was Daniel. Sitting on the floor, head tilted, eyes focused on something only he could see, or he was humming, and beside him was Angela. Still, calm, rocking slowly on her knees, folding laundry as she hummed along. It wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a melody, a lullaby, an old Italian lullaby, soft and haunting, the kind sung by mothers generations ago, passed down like a sacred memory. Sophia stepped into the room, barely breathing. She didn't want to break the moment. She didn't understand it, but she felt it, deep in her bones. Her son, who had never spoken, was humming. And Angela, her silent maid, was humming too. Later that evening, Sophia approached Angela privately. She tried to stay calm, but her voice had an edge. "Sophia, that song, that lullaby, where did you learn it?" Angela lowered her eyes, shrugged. She didn't answer. "Sophia, was it Italian?" Angela gave a small nod, but said nothing. "Sophia, do you speak Italian, Angela?" Angela looked her straight in the eye and slowly shook her head. Not a word escaped her lips. Sophia stood there, frozen in confusion, a woman who had never spoken. Now humming an Italian lullaby her son suddenly responded to, Coincidence, instinct, or something more? The next day, Daniel searched for Angela, quietly followed her from room to room, watched her fold sheets, watched her wipe counters. He didn't speak, but he stayed close. For the first time, he chose someone, and Angela never pushed. She just allowed. Some days she hummed, some days he echoed her notes. Little by little, the silence between them became music. The house had changed. Where silence once sat like a shadow, something lighter now floated, in the air. Daniel followed Angela like a little echo, still wordless but no longer lost. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the house basked in gold, Daniel was in the study, alone. Sophia passed by the door, casually glancing in, until her heart stopped. He was holding a chalkboard, chalk in hand, focused. Then, slowly, he turned it around. Grazie. Thank you, in Italian. It was the first time Sophia had ever seen her son write a meaningful word. Not random letters, not scribbles, but thanks. Tears blurred her vision as she stepped inside. Grazie, she whispered. Thank you for what? Daniel looked past her, toward the hallway. Angela stood there, quiet, still, watching. The next morning, Sophia found another message, this time on the kitchen counter, scribbled in soft chalk. Ti amo, Mama. I love you, Mom. She dropped the mug in her hand. It shattered, but she didn't notice. Her boy, her silent little boy, had written the words she had dreamed of hearing since he was born. But then, something clicked. Grazie, ti amo. Both in Italian. Why Italian? She hadn't hired any Italian tutors. No therapist had used it. She herself didn't speak a word. Only one person remained. Angela was folding sheets when Sophia entered. No knock, no warning. Her voice trembled, not with rage, but something close to betrayal. Sophia, you taught him, didn't you? Angela looks up, says nothing. Sophia, why Italian? Why now? Why you, Angela? Because it's the only language your son responds to. I recognized the melody, the one he hummed that day. My late son used to hum it too. It was the first time anyone in that house had heard Angela speak. Her voice was like velvet wrapped in sorrow, quiet, weighted, beautiful. Angela, my son, he was autistic too, brilliant, and he only responded to rhythm and melody. I taught him languages using lullabies. Italian was his favorite. He passed away when he was 8. When your Daniel hummed that same lullaby, I didn't plan to respond, but it felt like my son was calling to me again. Sophia stood in silence, no longer angry, just moved. 2 mothers, one grieving in silence, one drowning in helplessness, and a little boy unknowingly bridging them both. Angela had never tried to teach Daniel. She had only recognized the song his soul was already singing. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to unfold. Daniel began to change. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. A longer glance, a faint smile, a sound that almost resembled a giggle, like air catching joy for the very first time. But Angela saw it all. Every flicker of hope, every twitch of connection. She watched him like a gardener watches the first green sprout in the desert, delicate, unpromised, but full of potential. Daniel started waiting by the door each morning, clutching the same little toy in his hand, standing there like a soldier waiting for someone he couldn't name. And when Angela arrived, his eyes lit up. Not wide, not dramatic, but with a subtle brightness, like someone who had been in the dark too long and had just remembered the color of light. He began mimicking her, soft clicks of the tongue, hums, of lullabies, even trying to roll his R's in Italian like her. He didn't speak, not yet, but he connected. He responded, he reached. Sophia saw it all too, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes through a cracked door, pretending to pass by. Her heart swelled, full of wonder and gratitude, but also a strange ache. This was the bond she had begged the universe for, and yet it wasn't with her. It was with the maid, the quiet woman who never spoke, who had simply slipped in and reached the unreachable. An outsider, who had somehow unlocked a door none of the experts could find. And though Sophia tried to feel only gratitude, a shadow crept in. It was pride. It was pain. It was the quiet voice that whispered, "Why her, and not me?" The whispers grew louder outside the home. It came to a head on a Sunday afternoon, during one of Sophia's elegant garden brunches. The lawn sparkled with sunlight and wine. Guests in linen and pearls wandered through the roses, commenting on real estate, business, and Botox. Then one guest leaned in, voice sweet as syrup and just as sticky, and said, "Sophia, darling, is it true your son finally responded to the maid? Not one of the specialists?" Another chimed in with a smirk barely concealed. "Imagine that. All that money, all that effort, and it's the help that cracked the code." Sophia smiled, politely, laughed even, but inside something sharp twisted. She didn't blame Angela, not consciously, but the eyes around her did. And the more they talked, the more that cruel cocktail brewed. Jealousy, shame, confusion. That night, Sophia walked down the hallway and found Angela brushing Daniel's hair. The boy was nearly asleep, humming ever so softly under his breath. It was beautiful, gentle, intimate, and it hurt. Sophia waited until Angela had stepped back, and then, in a voice that tried to sound composed, said, "I think we need to create a little space." Angela blinked. She didn't speak, didn't question, didn't argue. She simply nodded, slow and quiet. The next morning, Angela didn't enter Daniel's room. She didn't hum any songs. She avoided his hallway altogether. She returned to silence, just like before. Daniel noticed. Instantly, the boy who had begun to smile no longer did. The light in his eyes dimmed. He stopped humming, stopped mimicking. He no longer stood by the door. He no longer waited for anyone. Sophia tried to step in. She sat beside him, imitated the sounds Angela had made, played the lullabies she had secretly recorded. She held his toys, brushed his hair, whispered to him in soft, hopeful tones, but his eyes no longer met hers. His body was present, but his soul had curled away again, back into that quiet corner where no one could reach him. She had reclaimed her role and lost the progress that had only just begun to bloom. That night, Angela stood alone in the laundry room, folding fresh linens. Her hands worked, but her shoulders trembled, and then quietly, without warning, she wept. Not for herself, not even for Sophia, but for the little boy who had been pulled back into the silence just when he had begun to find music again. Angela wept for a child that wasn't hers, because once, years ago, she had wept for the one who was. She knew what it looked like when hope bloomed, and she knew the exact sound it made when it broke. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of golden, over-polished day that felt too perfect to hold any cracks. The estate was filled with laughter, clinking glasses and soft music echoing through the halls. Family and guests wandered the garden paths, sipping wine and commenting on weather and wellness, and how remarkably well Daniel seemed to be doing lately. But no one noticed that Daniel had wandered off. Not at first. Not until his name was called once, twice, then again with rising urgency. His plate was still full, his toy left abandoned. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface. First came the casual searches, peeking behind curtains, calling his name with a smile. But then, as the minutes dragged into 10, into 20, into 30, the smiles vanished. The staff was alerted, guests spread out. Sophia's voice shook as she shouted her son's name into every room, every corner, every possibility. The security team scoured the property. The garden emptied. The house felt colder. Fear, raw and unscripted, crept into everyone's throat. Then someone called from the East Wing, one of the nannies. "We found him." But there was no relief in her voice, just confusion. He wasn't outside, not in the garden or by the gates. He was in the old laundry room, the one no one used anymore. The one Angela used to keep spotless when she still moved quietly through the halls. There he was, curled into a ball on the floor, clutching something soft and dark in his tiny hands. It was her scarf, Angela's scarf. The same one she had worn every day and left behind when she withdrew herself weeks ago. He had found it, somehow remembered it, somehow needed it. And he was crying. Not screaming, not wailing, but shaking in a way that made grown men pause in the doorway. Sophia rushed in, her heels echoing on the tile, her heart thunderous with guilt and terror. She knelt beside him, called his name gently. No response. He clutched the scarf tighter. Tears rolled down his cheeks like rivers with no destination. And then a quiet breath behind them. Angela, she had come back. Called by someone, maybe instinct, maybe a whisper from the divine. She stepped into the room like she belonged to it, like she had never left. Her eyes met Daniel's, and in that single moment, the world paused. The boy looked up, still trembling. His lips moved, slowly, uncertainly, then clear, soft, in perfect Italian. Ti amo, mamma. 2 words, his first words, spoken not to the woman who birthed him, but to the woman who had waited in silence, who had hummed him open, who had taught his spirit to feel safe. The room held its breath. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled. Tears streamed down her face in disbelief, in gratitude, in grief. Angela dropped to her knees. She didn't cry, not yet. She just looked at him, as if seeing a miracle she no longer believed she deserved, and then quietly she opened her arms. Daniel crawled into them like he was coming home. He buried his face in her chest, clinging to her scarf, to her scent, to her spirit. Angela rocked him gently, the way only a mother could, not a replacement, not a thief, but someone who had loved him in silence long enough to be loved back. Around them, no one spoke, not a guest, not a staff member, not even Sophia. The silence was sacred. It was holy. It was the sound of a boy choosing his first word and who to give it to. Later, people would try to explain it, neurologists and therapists, linguists and skeptics. But in that room, in that hour, the explanation didn't matter. All that mattered was that a quiet maid who never spoke had unlocked the voice of a child the world had already counted out. And when he finally spoke, he did so in her language, with her name for love, and everything changed. For a long moment, nothing moved in the room but the rise and fall of Daniel's small chest against Angela's embrace. The scarf still clutched in his tiny hand, the warmth of her arms wrapped around him like a memory made real. And Sophia stood there watching, breathing in the gravity of it all. She wasn't a cold woman, not really. She had simply been hardened by years of doing everything alone, of believing money could fill the cracks where love slipped through. But now, in this quiet room filled with dust and echoes, she saw clearly, not just her son, but herself. The ache she had ignored, the fear she had buried, and the truth she had almost let pride destroy. Slowly, her steps drew her closer, not as a mother competing, but as a mother surrendering to love in its purest form. She knelt beside them, Angela and Daniel, and reached out with trembling hands. Angela looked up. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, because none were needed. Sophia leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said, the words catching in her throat like a confession. "For saving him, when I didn't know how." Angela's lips quivered. She hadn't been waiting for praise. She had been waiting for this, for someone to see her not just as the maid in the background, not just as the help who hummed, but as a human. As a mother, as someone who had carried unbearable loss and still found the strength to give love again. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let them fall. Not hidden in a laundry room, not muffled behind closed doors, but openly, fully in front of people who were finally listening. Sophia wrapped her arms around both of them, her son and the woman who had helped him find the light. And in that moment, the line between employer and employee, between class and color, between grief and healing, it disappeared. It was just 3 people holding each other in the middle of a room that had once held only silence. That night, the house felt different, warmer, lived in, like something sacred had been returned. Sophia sat with Angela in the kitchen long after Daniel had gone to sleep. No more walls, no more polite nods or distance. Just 2 women, 2 mothers, sharing tea, laughter, and stories that had been buried too long. She offered Angela more. then her job back. She offered her a place at the table, a room near Daniel's, a title that didn't need defining, family. Angela hesitated, tears in her eyes again, because deep down, she had been surviving, cleaning, folding, fading into the walls. Ever since she lost her own son, she had learned how to live without being seen, without being needed. But tonight, she was needed. And not for what she did, but for who she was. She said yes, not with a shout, but with a nod, a smile, a tear that sparkled like the beginning of something new. And as the stars blinked gently, above the quiet estate, a boy slept peacefully for the first time in his life, wrapped in the scarf of the woman he now called Mama. And the house that had once been filled with silence now held a love that spoke in whispers, lullabies, and a single phrase that had changed everything: Ti amo. In the weeks and months that followed, the house changed again, but this time in ways that no one expected. Daniel began attending therapy, but it wasn't the sterile sessions with strangers that made the biggest difference. It was the time he spent with Angela, his guardian of silence, his gentle guide into the world of words and feelings. Together they worked patiently, slowly, unlocking doors that had long been shut. Each session was a quiet victory, a new sound, a new glance, a new connection. Sophia and Angela found themselves in an unspoken partnership, a new kind of family forged not by blood or title, but by love and necessity. They learned to co-parent Daniel in a way that felt natural and honest, weaving together the strength of a mother and the tenderness of a woman who had carried loss deep in her soul. Their relationship was not without struggles. Old wounds surfaced. Pride clashed with humility. But in those moments they found space for grace, for understanding, for real healing. Angela, who had spent so many years in silence, began to speak again. Not just to Daniel, but to herself. Small words at first, soft and hesitant. Words of hope, of memory, of new beginnings. She found her voice in laughter, in shared stories, in the quiet acknowledgement that she belonged, not as an employee but as a mother, a friend, a healer. Sophia watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and relief. She had come to understand that healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy and beautiful, a dance of pain and joy. And through it all, Daniel blossomed, no longer the silent boy locked behind walls, but a child learning to speak his truth in his own time, in his own way. The house that once echoed only silence now sang softly with hope, with whispered Italian lullabies, with the sound of new words and laughter. And in that space, in the heart of their blended family, they found something they had all been searching for: belonging. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it to spread hope and healing. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life tales that remind us love speaks louder than words. What part moved you the most? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, sometimes the quietest voices tell the deepest stories.